They came at dawn, with the authority of the moon behind them. I heard the horses first, not the soft creak of a merchant's cart or the familiar clop of the elder's gray mare making her rounds through Asheville. These were war horses, heavy-hooved and proud, their iron shoes ringing against the river stones at the bottom of the hill like a hammer striking a bell over and over and over. I was at the well when the sound reached me, drawing the first bucket of the morning, and I stopped with the rope still in my hands and stood very still the way I had learned to stand when something large and dangerous moved nearby. My name is Sira. I am 23 years old. I own a small stone house at the edge of Asheville Village, a plot of winter herbs, 4 laying hens, and a donkey named Bose. At the time the Alpha King soldiers crested the hill, I owned nothing else worth mentioning. Not a husband, not a reputation. Those had both been taken from me 2 years prior when my husband Davin was killed on the Ridge Road, and every man in Asheville decided I had something to do with it. I did not. But the truth of a woman alone is a fragile thing in a village that has already decided. It bends in the hands of men who need it to bend. It gets shaped and trimmed and rearranged until it fits the story they were already telling, and then they hand it back to you and call it justice, and you are supposed to be grateful that they didn't take anything else. There were 12 soldiers in the king's company, and behind them, on a black horse so dark it seemed to swallow the early light, rode the Alpha King himself. I had never seen him. I had heard stories, the way everyone hears stories, that he was enormous, that his wolf was silver-black and ancient, that he had ended the Thornfield War in a single night by walking alone into the enemy encampment, and returning at dawn with nothing but a sword that wasn't his. I had heard he was merciless and fair, which sounds like a contradiction until you live long enough to understand that both things can be true of the same man, and that the contradiction is only in how you hope they'll treat you before you know which kind of situation you're in. He stopped at the top of the hill and looked down at the village the way a man looks at a map, measuring it, counting it, deciding what it was worth. Then one of his soldiers pointed at me. I let go of the well rope. The bucket hit the water far below with a hollow splash I felt in my teeth. The soldier who pointed was Captain Rain, a man I recognized because he had come through Asheville 6 months ago collecting the tithe, and had eaten at the elder's table, and had looked at me the entire meal with the particular expression of a man who wants you to know he has decided something about you. He was broad-shouldered and handsome in the way that men with power always seem handsome from a distance, and he rode down the hill now with 3 soldiers flanking him like he was delivering good news. "Sira of Asheville," he called before he had even reached me. "By order of Alpha King Calder, you are summoned for questioning in the matter of the death of Davin of Asheville, your husband, who was killed on the Ridge Road in the autumn 2 years past." The word they used was summoned. It meant arrested. I had lived long enough to know the difference between the words men say and the words they mean. I stood with my empty bucket at my feet and looked up at Captain Rain on his horse and said, "I'll need a moment to put the hens in." He looked at me like I had said something strange. "The hens," I said. "If I leave them out, the fox will have them before noon." He stared at me for a moment longer. Then he said, "You have 5 minutes." I walked back to my house without running. Running was what they wanted. Running was agreement. It was the body saying, "Yes, I am guilty. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, you have the right to chase me." I was afraid, but I have always understood that fear and compliance are not the same thing, and a woman who has survived 2 years alone in a village that wanted her gone has learned the precise art of letting her hand stay steady while her heart hammers itself senseless inside her chest. Bose was in the yard. He was a gray donkey, mid-sized, with ears like 2 accusations, and a face that managed to look both ancient and deeply unimpressed by everything it encountered. Davin had bought him the spring before he died, from a horse trader who had come through with a cart full of livestock, and a story about where the animal had come from. I had thought at the time that 30 silver was too much to pay for a donkey. however clever his face was. 2 years later, I understood that Davin had been right and I had been wrong, which was a thing I had not managed to say out loud to him enough times while he was alive, and which I thought about more often than I expected in the cold evenings alone. Bose watched me put the hens away. He watched me wash my hands at the rain barrel. He watched me take a slow breath at the door of the house, the kind of breath you take when you are about to do something you cannot prepare for except by being still for one more moment. Then, as I turned to walk back out to the soldiers, he stepped in front of me and put his nose against my chest and stood there. "I know," I said. He made a sound low in his throat, not a bray, something quieter, something that sat between a warning and a question. "I know," I said again. "I'll be careful." I walked back out. Bose followed. Captain Rain looked at the donkey the way people always looked at Bose when they first encountered him with me, with mild impatience that something this ordinary had inserted itself into a serious situation. "Leave the animal." "He goes where I go," I said. "He has since my husband died. There's no one else to take him." This was true, but it was also strategy. Bose was calm around people he trusted. Around people he did not trust, he became a different kind of animal entirely. I had watched him for 2 years and I had a theory about what he could detect that humans could not, but I had kept that theory to myself as well, for the same reason I kept most of my truths to myself. In Asheville, in those 2 years, the cost of being right about the wrong thing was too high. You learned to wait. You learned to hold the truth quietly, until you found a moment when it had some chance of being heard. Rain looked at the Alpha King on the hill. The king said nothing. He made a small motion with his hand, the kind of motion that has learned not to be large, because it doesn't need to be. Rain looked back at me. "The animal comes." They put me in the middle of the company, soldiers on all sides, and we rode up through Asheville Single Street. The village was awake by then. Faces appeared in doorways and windows, the way faces do when the thing that everyone has been quietly expecting finally arrives, and there is that particular mixture of relief and guilt that comes from watching someone else's worst day confirm your worst assumptions. Old Merritt, who ran the smokehouse, stepped onto her stoop and watched me pass with her arms folded and her mouth pressed into a thin line. She had been the first to say, 2 years ago, that she didn't see how a woman alone could have had nothing to do with it. I had not spoken to her since, which in a village the size of Asheville was a remarkable feat of sustained effort. The miller's wife, Josna, came to her gate. She was younger than Merritt and had more reason to know better, but she had known Davin longer than she had known me, and grief makes people stupid. She had told anyone who would listen that Davin would never have gone out on the Ridge Road alone unless something drove him there. She had framed it as a defense of him. She had not appeared to understand that it was an accusation of me. As if a man had never in the history of the world made a bad decision without a woman behind him pushing. Bose walked beside my horse and did not look at anything except the road. We reached the elder's house at the top of the street. Elder Canaan was already outside, as if he had been waiting, which he had. He was the kind of man who was always waiting to be the most important person in whatever happened next. He was 70, white-haired, and he carried himself with the careful dignity of a man who had never been wrong in his own memory. He had been elder of Asheville for 23 years, which happened to be exactly as long as I had been alive, though I had not always been aware of how significant a coincidence that was. The Alpha King dismounted. I had thought from the hill that he was large. Up close, he was something else entirely. He was not simply tall. He moved the way very few men move, like the space around him was arranged by his presence rather than the other way around, like the world had learned his proportions and made adjustments. His hair was dark with a thread of silver at the temple. His eyes were gray-green, the color of the river in winter, cold and deep and very still. He wore no armor, only dark riding clothes, and he had a way of looking at a thing that made you feel he was seeing 2 or 3 layers underneath it, that whatever you showed him, he was already reading what lay beneath. He looked at me. I looked back. I had spent 2 years practicing, not looking away from men who wanted me to. It had started as defiance and slowly become something else, something more like a habit of self-preservation that had grown its own kind of strength. I was very good at it by now. I could hold a man's gaze through the length of his doubt and come out the other side still standing, still steady, still exactly where I had been when he first looked. "Sira of Asheville," he said. His voice was exactly what I expected, low, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never needed to raise it to be heard. "My Lord King," I said. "You know why we're here?" Captain Rain said, questioning, "About my husband's death." "Yes. I've already been questioned, 3 times, by Elder Canaan and twice by the pack's own investigator. I told them everything I knew each time. Which was nothing, because I had nothing to do with it." Something moved in his face. Not doubt, something more careful than doubt. Assessment. He was the kind of man who listened to what you said and what you didn't say at the same time, and he was doing that now, reading both layers at once. "There is new evidence," he said. "A witness who claims to have seen you on the Ridge Road that evening." The world did a slow, cold turn. "That's not possible," I said, "because I wasn't there." "The witness is prepared to swear it." "Then the witness is lying." Silence. A bird called somewhere above the village, a long descending note like a question nobody wanted to answer. Elder Canaan stepped forward with the expression of a man, prepared to manage a situation that he has prepared for. "My Lord King, I apologize for her tone. She has always been." "I didn't ask you," the king said, and Canaan stopped like he had walked into a wall. The king looked at me again. His gray-green eyes were very steady. Who would lie about this and why? I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the 2 years. I thought about Merritt's arms folded on her stoop. I thought about Josna's gate. I thought about every meal I had eaten alone, every repair I had made to the stone house alone, every night I had lain awake in the particular silence of a life that other people had decided was shameful, going over what I knew and what I suspected, and what I could not prove in the dark where it was just me and the cold. "I don't know who the witness is," I said, "but I would be very interested to find out." Captain Rain moved his horse slightly forward. "It is Aldrin the woodcutter. He says he saw you riding out on the Ridge Road an hour before sunset on the day your husband was killed." Aldrin. I knew Aldrin. Aldrin had owed Davin money. A substantial amount, the kind of amount that gets forgiven when there is no husband to collect it and only a wife with no standing to pursue it. The kind of debt that sits quietly in a ledger until a woman becomes too inconvenient to have around, and then becomes very useful indeed. Aldrin had sat at the inquiry 2 years ago and said he saw nothing, knew nothing, had been in his workshop all that day. He had met my eyes when he said it, and his face had been perfectly smooth. I had noted that smoothness the way you note the stillness of water before something surfaces. I thought about what Bose had done when Aldrin passed my gate 3 months ago. I thought about my theory. "I would like," I said carefully, "for Aldrin to make that statement in front of my donkey." Another silence, a different kind. Captain Rain looked at me the way you look at something you aren't sure is dangerous. "I beg your pardon." "Bring Aldrin here. Let him make his statement in front of Bose." Elder Canaan made a sound that began as laughter and curdled into something harder. "This is ridiculous. My Lord King, she is attempting to delay and confuse the proceedings with—" "Why?" the king asked. His eyes hadn't left me. I chose my words the way I chose everything in those 2 years, carefully, with the understanding that one wrong step could cost me everything I had left, which was not much but was mine. "My husband gave me that donkey the spring before he died," I said. "Davin bought him from a horse trader who came through Asheville on his way from the Eastern Territories. The man told Davin the animal had been bred and raised among the wise women of the eastern forest, the ones who have kept the old knowledge for 300 years. The knowledge of the body, of what lives in the blood, of the things animals sense that humans learn to stop paying attention to. The trader said the donkey could tell truth from a lie the way a dog smells rot under fresh bread. He said the animal had been tested. He said there was not a liar alive the beast could not identify. You're asking me to conduct an official investigation based on the instincts of a donkey, the king said. I'm asking you to let Aldrin say what he has to say in front of an animal that will do nothing if the statement is true and will have a strong and immediate opinion if it is not. I paused. If Bose does nothing, if he stands there and lets Aldrin speak without reacting, I will come with you without another word. I will answer every question your investigators put to me. I will accept whatever judgment you and your court determine is right. The silence stretched out between us like rope. Rain leaned toward the king and said something low that I couldn't hear. The king listened without responding, without any acknowledgement of Rain's voice beyond the small stillness of a man who is processing information he has already decided about. Then he looked at the donkey. Bose was standing very still beside me, ears forward and precisely aimed, watching the Alpha King with the focused attention of an animal that has decided something matters and is not going to be distracted from it. He had that look on his face, the ancient, knowing look that I had seen him wear when something important was happening. He wore it the way an old woman wears her age, not pretending it wasn't there, not performing it, simply carrying it with complete indifference to whether anyone found it impressive. The king looked at the donkey for a long moment, then he looked at me. For just a moment, only a moment, I saw something in his face that wasn't assessment or authority or the careful distance of a man accustomed to being right in public. I saw something that looked almost like recognition. The kind of recognition that happens not when you meet someone for the first time, but when you understand something you have seen before. "Send for Aldrin," he said. Rain stiffened as if someone had replaced his spine with something rigid. "My lord, I must advise against giving legitimacy to." "Send for him." It took half an hour for Aldrin to arrive. In that half hour, Asheville held its breath. The soldiers stood at their posts. The king stood near his horse with his hands behind his back and looked at the hills as if he were reading something written on them. Elder Canaan stood by his door and said nothing, but I watched his hands. He was a man who betrayed himself in his hands, and his hands were doing something that hands do when they want to be still and cannot manage it. I stood with Bose at the edge of the elder's yard and waited. I had become very good at waiting. 2 years of it had turned waiting from something you endured into something you wielded, a kind of patience so absolute it had the quality of a blade. Aldrin came down the street with the deliberate ease of a man who believes he is safe, which is the particular walk of someone who has been promised safety by someone else, and has not yet learned that promises made in the dark do not survive the light. He was thick-necked and broad, with hands that had done real work all his life and a face that had practiced innocence, until it wore the shape of the real thing, smooth, easy, familiar with its own expression. He saw me and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, just a small shift, like a door settling in its frame. He did not see Bose at first. The donkey was on my right side, slightly behind me, and Aldrin had his eyes on the king with the careful attention of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to do and wants to make sure the audience is who he was told it would be. "Aldrin of Asheville," the king said, "you have made a statement that you witnessed Sierra of Asheville on the Ridge Road on the evening her husband was killed. Is this correct?" "It is, my lord," Aldrin said. His voice was steady. His face was steady. He had been practicing this for some time, possibly since Canaan first put the idea to him, possibly for months. A man who owes a debt is a man who can be made to do most things if you hold the debt over him at the right angle. "Tell me what you saw." Aldrin spoke. He described an evening that had never happened with careful, plausible detail, the quality of the light at that hour, the color of my horse, the direction I was traveling, the posture of a woman in a hurry who did not want to be seen. He had constructed it well, the way a patient liar constructs a lie, with just enough specificity to sound like memory and just enough vagueness at the edges to resist being pinned down. He was not a stupid man. He had thought about this. Bose had stepped around me while Aldrin was talking. He moved quietly, the way he always moved when he had decided something, with a focus that looked almost eerie on an animal that was usually so casually indifferent to the world's proceedings. He moved the way a thing moves when it is not moved by will but by something older than will, something instinctive and precise. He walked toward Aldrin with his ears angled forward, and his gaze absolutely fixed, his gray legs moving in that particular deliberate way. Aldrin saw him then. His sentence stopped mid-word, like a lamp going out. Bose kept walking. Aldrin said. Bose reached him. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no rearing, no wild-eyed rage, no violence of the kind you'd expect from an animal whose dignity has been offended. Bose simply lowered his head, positioned himself with the calm precision of an animal that has done this before and knows exactly what the job requires, and kicked Aldrin hard in the shin with his right hind hoof. Aldrin yelped and stumbled back. One of the soldiers grabbed him to keep him from going down. Bose stood where he was and looked at me. His expression, if a donkey can be said to have one, was one of complete, exhausted vindication. The look of an animal that has been waiting a long time to make a point and is satisfied that the point has been made at last. "I told you," I said to the king. The silence in the street was total. Every face in every doorway had gone very still. Elder Canaan had his mouth open. Rain's hand had gone to his sword hilt out of what must have been pure reflex, because he clearly had no idea what he would do with it now. It was just an animal reaction," Rain said quickly. "The beast was spooked by." "What spooked him?" the king asked. Rain had no answer. The king walked to Aldrin. He was not gentle in the way he stood beside him. He did not touch him and did not need to. There was a proximity that large men with authority can use that is more effective than hands. He stood close enough that Aldrin had to look up to meet his eyes, and he was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "You are going to tell me the truth now," he said, "because I will know the difference. Because I have spent 15 years learning the difference. And because whatever was promised to you by whoever sent you here is worth considerably less than what I can take from you if you make me find the truth without your help." Aldrin's face broke apart the way a face does when the structure holding it up fails all at once. Not slowly, all at once. It started in the eyes went first, and then the jaw, and then the set of the shoulders, and then he was just a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally been given permission to put it down. "Elder Canaan," he said. The name came out of him like something he had been holding for a very long time, something he had swallowed and carried until the weight of it had become the weight of everything. Elder Canaan told me what to say. He said the case needed to be closed properly. He said the investigation had gone on too long and made the village look bad, and that if it was going to be closed, it needed to be closed on someone. He said, Aldrin's voice cracked at the seam. He said if the woman was found guilty, the debt would be cleared, Davin's debt to me, the full amount. He said no one would miss her. He said she had no family, no standing, no one who would come looking. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. It had weight. It had edges you could cut yourself on. I did not look at Canaan. I was looking at the king, and the king was already looking at me, and in his face I saw something that I had almost stopped expecting from any man by then, the particular expression of someone who believes you, not because you have convinced them with argument or evidence, because they were already prepared to. Because they were listening to something underneath the words that the words themselves had not needed to say. "How long have you known," he said, "that the elder was behind it? 2 years of suspicion, 3 months of certainty." I kept my voice level and even the way I had kept it level for 2 years. Bose kicked Aldrin's dog when it came through my gate 3 months ago carrying a note. The note was from Aldrin, worded carefully as a greeting but containing a suggestion that if I were to quietly leave Asheville, certain matters might be arranged differently. When I kept the note and sat with what it meant, the pieces of what I had suspected for 2 years resolved into something I was certain of. Aldrin held the debt. Canaan held the case open. Between them, I was useful. A woman who might be guilty is a woman too busy surviving the suspicion to pursue anything she might know. The king was quiet for a moment. His hands were still at his sides. Then he turned to his soldiers. "Detain the elder," he said, "and the woodcutter. I want every person in this village who has given a statement in the original inquiry prepared to speak again by nightfall." What followed was not quick. These things never are. The dismantling of a lie that has been standing for 2 years takes the whole day that the lie took to build, and more besides. The village turned itself inside out the way a place does when the thing that has been holding a truth down is finally lifted, slowly at first, then all at once, like the moment a river breaks through a dam, not dramatic but irresistible, carrying everything with it. Merritt, who had been the first to fold her arms against me 2 years ago, was the third person to come forward with information. She said it quietly, to one of the king's investigators in the doorway of her smokehouse, that she had always thought something was wrong with Canaan's handling of the original inquiry, that he had moved too fast to a conclusion, that he had discouraged certain questions, that a man who had come to town to speak with Davin the week before he died had been turned away from the inquiry entirely, and she had not understood why until now. She said all of this with the particular determination of a woman who has spent time on the wrong side of a thing and wants to be on the right side of the accounting before the day is over. The woman who came to my gate before noon was Josna. She stood at my gate for a while before she said anything. I sat on my step and watched her stand there, and I did not get up to open the gate. I had found in those 2 years that letting people come to you completely, making them walk the whole distance, say the whole thing, was a kind of fairness. Not cruelty, fairness. It made the words matter. "I'm sorry," she said. I looked at her. I thought about the 2 years. I thought about every door that had not opened, every conversation that had gone sideways, every morning of the particular loneliness of a woman who has been accused and not believed in a place small enough that she cannot leave the accusation behind. "I know," I said, "it was not forgiveness. It was not the absence of forgiveness. It was the truth of the moment, which was that I understood she was sorry, and that sorry could not give me back 2 years, and that I had not yet decided what I wanted to do with her sorrow, and that I was not prepared to decide today." She nodded. She left. The investigation ran through the afternoon. I sat in my yard with Bose and the hens and tried to feel something clean, but the feeling that comes after a long injustice is rarely clean. It is murky and strange, like a river after a heavy storm, full of things that have been dislodged from where they settled, carried along in water that hasn't decided yet where it's going, full of old sediment and unexpected clarity in turns. I thought about Davin. I thought about the spring he bought the donkey, the way he had come home with Bose on a lead and a story about the horse trader, and the wise women of the East that I had mostly dismissed at the time as the kind of story a man tells to justify spending 30 silver on a donkey with a philosophical face. I thought about the evening before he died, the way he had been restless at supper, eating without tasting, his eyes on something I couldn't see. I had asked him what was wrong. He had said nothing. I had believed him. I did not know then what I know now, that Davin had found something in the elder's records, that he had been going to the Ridge Road to meet someone who could confirm what he had found. That elder Canaan had discovered the meeting and had arrived first. This last part came out in Canaan's own statements, dragged out of him piece by the king's investigators through the afternoon, each admission smaller than the last as the man tried to find some version of the truth he could live inside. There is no such version. There never is. The truth does not have rooms you can arrange yourself in. It is what it is, all the way down, and the only choice you ever had was whether to tell it or carry it. And Canaan had chosen to carry it for 2 years, and now the weight had fallen on him, and he was under it. The king came to my gate as the sun was going low. He came alone. He stood on the other side of the gate with his hands at his sides, and his silver-threaded hair lit by the evening light in a way that made him look, for a moment, less like a king and more like a man who had spent a long day in a difficult place, and arrived at the end of it with something he needed to say. His gray-green eyes were tired in a way I had not seen in them that morning, and I thought that whatever he had been doing for the last several hours, investigating the death of a man in a small village that had been lying to itself for 2 years, it had cost him something he had not expected to spend. Bose walked over to the gate. He pushed his nose through the gate slats and pressed it against the king's hand. The king looked down at him. He did not pull away. He stood and let the donkey investigate his hand with the careful deliberateness of an animal making a judgment. And then Bose made that quiet sound again, the one between a warning and a question, but this time landing closer to the question side, and stepped back, satisfied. "He didn't kick you," I said. "No. He's never wrong. So I understand." The king looked up at me. The sun was doing something complicated with the light between us, turning everything amber and deep. My Lord King Calder of the Northern Pax, in case the introduction got lost in the morning. "I know who you are," I said. "And I know who you are, Sira, who has been surviving a lie for 2 years and is apparently better at it than most people are at telling the truth." He paused. There was something careful in the way he said what came next, the way a man says something he has been thinking about for hours and wants to say right. "I want to apologize." I was not expecting that. I looked at him carefully, trying to find the angle, the strategy, the way men who have just been proven wrong sometimes apologize in a way that is really about reclaiming the authority of the moment, turning their mistake into a demonstration of their own magnanimity. I did not find it. His face was open in a way that seemed to cost him something, and was not asking for anything back. "Canaan filed the original petition with my office," he said. "I should have reviewed it myself. Instead, I delegated, and Rain came here 6 months ago and returned with a report that said the case was worth reopening. I did not ask the right questions about why a case that had been closed twice was being brought back. That is a failure of mine, not just Rain's. I choose my officers. I set the standards they work by. I am responsible for what they do with that trust." I considered this for a moment. It was an unusual kind of authority, the kind that travels all the way down to accountability without losing itself along the way. "What happens to Canaan?" I said. "He will be tried before the full council. The debt Aldrin held against Davin's estate will be dissolved and formally annulled. The record of suspicion against you will be expunged from every ledger that holds it." He paused. "Your husband's actual killer, do you have a theory?" I was quiet for a moment. I think Davin found something in the elders' records, something about how the village funds were being managed. He was always careful about money in a way that some people thought was small-minded, but it was just that he understood numbers, and he didn't like it when they didn't add up. I think he went to the Ridge Road to meet someone who was going to help him bring what he knew to the right people. And I think Canaan found out about the meeting before the meeting happened. "We'll investigate." "I know you will," I paused. I just wanted to say it out loud. "I've been saying it in my own head for 2 years. It sounds different when someone is actually listening." He was very still, listening. It was one of the things I had noticed about him throughout the day, that he listened with his whole attention, not waiting for his turn to speak, not already composing his answer while you were still talking. He listened like he had decided that what you said mattered, and he was going to make sure he had all of it before he did anything with it. He was not a perfect man, I said. Davin. He was stubborn, and he spent more than we had on that donkey, and he was late more often than he was on time, and he had a way of being absolutely certain about things that sometimes made it very difficult to disagree with him even when he was wrong. I stopped. My voice had gone somewhere tight, and I needed a moment. But he was honest. He was kind in the particular way of people who don't think of kindness as a virtue they are performing, but simply as the way you are with people you care about. And he did not deserve to die on a road in the dark because an old man wanted to protect a ledger. No, the king said, he did not. And I did not deserve what came after. No, he said, you did not. We were quiet for a moment. The evening settled around the yard, that particular quality of late-day quiet that comes when a long and difficult thing has finally reached its end, and the air itself seems to be resting. Bose had wandered back to his corner and was investigating something near the fence post with the focused curiosity of an animal that has completed its important work for the day and is now free to attend to the small pleasures. I am required, the king said carefully, to offer formal reparation. There is a process for this. Land or funds or both, depending on what the council determines was lost and what can be restored. I know the law, I said. There is also, he said, and something shifted in his voice, something very small and careful and deliberate. What is not required by law? I looked at him. I would like to come back, he said. Not as the Alpha King, not in any official capacity. As a man who has been thinking about a woman at a well since this morning, who held a rope while 12 soldiers came over her hill and did not run, and who has a donkey that is apparently a better judge of character than my entire intelligence apparatus. Something moved in my chest that I did not quite have a name for yet. It was not the easy rush of a feeling that asks nothing of you. It was more like the feeling of a door you have kept shut for a very long time, shifting slightly on its hinge, not opening, not yet, just becoming possible. Bose would need to approve, I said. The king looked at the donkey. Bose looked back at him with his ancient, unimpressed face. That seems fair, the king said. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the 2 years. I thought about the rope, the bucket, the hollow splash at the bottom of the well, the sound of something dropped, something lost, something that fell when I wasn't ready. I thought about every morning of standing very still while something large and dangerous moved nearby. There is a market in Asheville on the 1st of every month, I said. I sell herbs, winter sage, rosemary, the dried lavender from the South Plot. I will be there, he said. You'll be conspicuous. I frequently am. You should know, I said, that Bose will not change his judgment of you. Whatever he decides tonight, he decides. He doesn't revise his opinions in response to better information. He makes them correctly the first time. Neither do I, the king said. Bose brayed once, short and decisive, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that needed it. We both looked at him. I think that's a yes, the king said. It might be gas, I said. The king looked at me. Something broke open in his face, not the controlled assessment I had watched all day, not the authority, not the careful carefulness of a man who is always being watched and has learned to manage what he shows. Just a man, surprised into a laugh he hadn't planned for, and the laugh was genuine and low, and it did something to the air between us that I hadn't been prepared for, a warmth that I felt across the gate as clearly as if it were a hand. First of the month, I said, before I could think about it too much. First of the month, he said. He left the way he had come, alone, unhurried, the space around him arranging itself back into the evening. I watched him go until the light took him, and then I stood in my yard with my cold tea and my donkey and my 4 hens settling into sleep in the careful way of hens, and I felt the particular strange lightness of a woman who has been carrying a weight so long that, when it is finally lifted, the absence of it is almost as hard to hold as the weight itself. Not grief for the weight, just the adjustment of the body to a new balance. The rope, the bucket, the hollow splash at the bottom of the well. I had let go and thought it was a fall. It was not. It was simply the moment before everything came back up. The morning after, I rebuilt the south fence. I had been meaning to do it for 6 months, and I had been too tired by everything else to manage it. But I woke before dawn with a clarity I had not felt in years, and I worked through the morning with my hands in the cold soil, driving posts and running wire, and it felt like a declaration. Not a loud one, just the quiet declaration of a woman who has decided that the world she is living in belongs to her, and she is going to act accordingly. Bose supervised from the middle of the yard. He ate 2 of my work gloves and looked completely unapologetic about it. This was usual. He had strong opinions about work gloves. By mid-morning, 4 of the village women had come to my yard. Not to apologize, that was Josna's territory, and she had done it already. These 4 came with tools, or with the willingness to hold things steady while I worked, and we said almost nothing but we worked together, and the fence went up in a single morning that would have taken me 3 days alone. The work itself was the thing. The being there was the thing. Some reckonings happen in words and some happen in silence, in the simple act of showing up and picking up what needs to be lifted. Marit came last. She brought bread still warm from the morning. I took it. I didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and we stood in my yard eating bread in the pale winter sun, while Bose attempted to insert himself between us and get at the loaf. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was something more like the first condition of forgiveness, the thing that has to exist before forgiveness can, the acknowledgement that something happened, something real, something that mattered. By the week's end, the elder's house was empty. The king's investigators had come and gone and taken everything that needed taking, and the records Davin had found, the ones that showed where the village funds had gone for 15 years, the ones that showed the pattern of Canan's arrangement with Aldrin, the ones that showed other names and other debts, and the careful long game of a man who had understood that a village elder controls more than just the ledger. Those records were on their way to the king's court. The village felt lighter. Not healed. A thing does not heal in a week that took 2 years to break. But lighter. The particular heaviness of a place carrying a truth it won't look at had lifted, and what was underneath was just a village again, imperfect and ordinary and capable of being better than it had been. I did not feel simple about any of it. The anger was still there. Not the hot kind, the kind that burns you up along with what you're angry at, but the cold kind that sits at the bottom of things like river stones, reminding you what it costs to be where you are. I did not think it would go away entirely, and I did not want it to. It was mine, in the way that only the things you have carried alone can truly be yours. But the first of the month came on a clear, cold morning with frost still on the gate, and the crocus just beginning at the edge of the south plot. I had the herb bundles ready before the market opened. Winter sage, rosemary, the dried lavender. I had tied them with the good twine, the kind I kept for things that mattered, and arranged them in the basket with an attention I had not bothered with in a long time. I had stopped caring about presentation somewhere in the first year of eating alone. I was beginning to care again. I set up my table and watched the market fill. The village moved around me differently than it had the week before. Not perfectly. Things do not move perfectly after they have been broken and set, but differently. People met my eye. Marit's daughter stopped to look at the lavender. The miller himself, who had not spoken to me in 18 months, gave me a nod when he passed that was stiff and still, but was something. He came just after mid-morning. Not with soldiers, not with the black horse or the authority or the careful distance of a king on official business. He came on a plain brown horse and in plain dark riding clothes, and he moved through the market like a man who had been to markets before and knew how to be present in one without consuming it. He paused at a bread stall. He looked at a knife maker's table. He stopped to watch a child demonstrate a spinning top with great seriousness. And then he came to mine. Bose was at my feet. He had insisted on coming, as he always did, and I had given up arguing about it before we reached the market gate. The king reached the table and looked at the herbs. He picked up a bundle of rosemary and turned it over in his hands in the particular way of someone who is not looking at the thing he is holding. He was looking at me. "How much?" he said. "2 coppers. He put 2 coppers on the table. He did not put the rosemary down. I looked at him. He looked at me. The frost had burned off and the winter sun was doing its best, thin and white and honest, which seemed about right for a morning like this one. Bose stood up. He walked to the king's side of the table, inserted himself between us in the way that donkeys do when they have decided that something requires their presence, and leaned his gray face against the king's hand, with the full trust of an animal that does not make mistakes about people. The king looked down at him. Something in his face went very quiet and very warm. "He approves," I said. "He does," the king agreed. "Don't read too much into it," I said. "He also approves of anyone who gives him sugar. His criteria are somewhat influenced by self-interest." "I don't have any sugar." "Then it's genuine." He looked at me. The steady river-winter eyes, the silver thread at the temple, the laugh still somewhere close beneath the surface from the night at my gate. "I would like," he said carefully, as if he had been turning the words over since that evening, "to know you, the way you know a place by walking it rather than looking at a map." I thought about the rope, the bucket, the 2 years. I thought about the door shifting on its hinge. "That takes time," I said. "I have it. And patience. More than people generally assume. And a willingness to be wrong." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "That is the one that costs." "Yes," I said. "It is." We stood with the winter sun between us and my donkey leaning against his hand, with the full trust of an animal that does not make mistakes about people. And I thought about Davin buying bows in the spring for reasons I had never entirely understood. And I thought about the horse trader and the wise women of the East. And I thought about what it means to be given a thing whose purpose you only understand in retrospect. He came back the 1st of every month. And then other days too, unannounced and unhurried, and Bose always heard the horse before I did, and always walked to the gate. And the sound of that, the donkey getting up and walking to the gate, that quiet announcement of arrival, became in time a kind of clock, a marker of the hours, a signal that something I had stopped expecting had become something I could count on. He was not a simple man. He carried authority like a stone he had carried long enough to have stopped noticing the weight, and it took time for me to see underneath it to what had always been there, the man who could be surprised by a laugh, the man who looked at my cold tea with something close to guilt, and had the grace not to pretend the guilt away. He was stubborn in the way of men who have been right too often. He had a temper I saw twice, and respected both times because he knew exactly where it lived and worked to keep it from doing damage. He was not perfect. He was honest. He was present. He was patient in the way he had said more than people assumed, and he listened the way very few people listen, with his whole attention, not waiting for his turn but actually following where you went, actually willing to arrive somewhere he hadn't planned to be. By the 3rd month, Bose had started walking to the gate before the horse was even audible. I had a theory about what that meant. I kept it to myself a little longer, not from fear this time. Just because some truths are worth holding for a moment before you say them out loud, worth feeling the weight of before you set them down, worth knowing fully yourself before you share them. Just because you learn, when things have cost you what mine had cost me, to be deliberate about what you give away and when. On the morning of the 4th month, standing at my gate with Bose between us and the spring coming in at last, green at the edges of the fields, the first crocus opened near the well. the air doing that thing it does when winter finally gives and something warmer comes to take its place. The king took my hand. He didn't say anything. He held it steady and unhurried, his thumb tracing the work-roughened line of my palm with the same attention he gave to everything, reading it like a map of somewhere he wanted to know. I let him. Bo stood between us and looked out at the morning with his ancient, particular face, satisfied, complete, and deeply certain that everything was exactly as it should be. The rope, the bucket. But not a fall. Never a fall. Just the moment before everything came back up, clean and cold and true, the way things come up from deep water, unhurried, carrying everything they left with, arriving at last.